Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Femtech Leaders. It's an absolute pleasure to have you all here today. As many of you may have noticed, my voice is slightly croaky, so apologies, but luckily no one is joining us today to listen to me speak. Just a couple of admin points before we get started with our fantastic panel. I encourage you to all ask questions in the chat sort of function. We will do our very best to get to them as soon as possible. But without further ado, and certainly to save my very croaky voice, I'm going to hand over to our fantastic moderator, Karina, for the panel Backing the Winners Across the Burgeoning Femtech Innovation Landscape Across Europe and Beyond. Over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me and the panel, Becky. I'm super excited. We have such a diverse group of investors today, and I'm very, very keen to hear your thoughts on some of the questions that I have thought about. So let's actually just jump straight into it. We're talking about the European femtech landscape, and I can't think of a better group to talk about where that landscape is going and what trends and kind of unique insights that you have about UK and European femtech. So I was thinking we start with Jess from Octopus Ventures. Could you give us a perspective on where do you see the landscape going and what are the current trends?
Thank you very much, Karina. So by way of introduction, I'm Jess, I'm investment principal at Octopus Ventures and specialise in health tech. My background is I started off in investment banking and then spent a number of years at a large insurer based in the UK investing in health tech strategically. So I guess my main focus at the moment is on the European ecosystem. And I guess about half of the companies that we see tend to fall within the category of reproductive health and pregnancy. I guess what I'm super excited about alongside that is the growth of companies and innovation we're seeing in linking female health to long-term longevity trends. And then later down the track as well, potential therapeutics linked to that. It's an area that probably makes up about 5% at the moment of the companies and pipeline that we engage with. But I think the sort of opportunity for impact on long-term health and longevity trends is monumental. And coupled with that, it's quite a small percentage of total innovation that we're seeing in that space. I guess outside of pregnancy and reproductive health, and then also longer-term longevity health, we see a large number of companies looking at menopause as well, so looking at sort of more senior female health. And I think that's a particularly interesting area and one that's having some success in selling to insurance and also employers as well. I guess we were having a think as a panel as well about some similarities between the US or not, as the case may be. Again, a very interesting and exciting market given some of the large raises and exits we've seen there. But I think for me, one consistency across both markets is actually the small number of companies that utilise AI. For us, it's around 6% of companies that we speak to utilise AI. Which actually compared to broader tech and actually broader healthcare is quite low. And I guess from my perspective, probably one of the main reasons for that is the data gap that we all know to be prevalent within female health. So yeah, those are probably my main takeaways.
I feel like there was just so much in there. I was taking notes, so many quite interesting insights, and especially around the AI bit and the data gap. Does anyone have any thoughts on anything that Jess said, or maybe you can add something from your end?
So in terms of trends, I think it's just to add to what Jess said about kind of menopause. Actually, I see that as quite a long-term theme because if you look at it from a macroeconomic perspective, the aging population is a huge theme, and it's not just for UK and Europe. And in May, the most recent kind of data out of China showed that even their population growth has slowed to a near halt. So I think the age tech that overlaps with femtech is quite an exciting trend. And kind of on that same basis, if we look at it from a bottom-up perspective, there was a study that came out that showed that women are hugely underrepresented in clinical trials for new medications. And that study concluded that women experience stronger side effects than men for the same dose of a drug, and experience adverse drug reactions about twice as much as men did. So combining that with remembering that women tend to age longer than men, I think the femtech companies that could address this issue or gather data and using AI, as Jess said, that could be part of a solution for this kind of problem, would receive a lot of investment and would be of interest of a lot of big pharma companies. And in terms of kind of the general, going back to the general US versus Europe and beyond investor landscape, let's say, I think the mentality is very different. There are various kind of statistics that, for example, 8% of venture capital investors in the UK come from a prior startup experience versus 60% in the US. 20% of UK investors come from consulting, or 30% come from banking. So the way they look at investments and the way they assess risk is very different from the US. And that's why I think that the investor landscape is different.
That's actually very interesting. Let's unpack a little bit the investor landscape topic. What we've seen quite a bit at Femtech Lab, we engage with a lot of different investment partners. And we've actually seen recently a lot of new funds emerging in the space in Europe, and a lot of kind of older, more established funds developing thesis around Femtech. And have you seen that as well? And do you see that happening more in the future? Do you see more micro funds focusing on certain areas of health tech and Femtech in particular? Do you see that as a trend?
Is that a question for me?
Anyone. Also, keen to hear from Lucas from Comstorm perspective.
Well, I see that trend coming, and I think it's only at the beginning of its momentum, but I'm going to hand over.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I have to tell you, I don't know. What I can see is that in the past, the discussion about Femtech was very hard. So I come from a bigger fund, but still for a European perspective, bigger fund, not globally. And when I proposed a Femtech deal at that time, back in 2015 or 16, I was laughed at. That was considered a niche, and whatever they tried to solve, some partner would say, my wife doesn't have that, so I don't think it's relevant. I think that perspective has changed quite significantly. Whether there are more micro funds or bigger funds tackling the issue, I think the landscape of venture capital has changed, and whether there's small funds or bigger funds, it doesn't have to be. It's not. I don't think that's industry specific. That also happens in other industries. What I can see though, with the, let's say, call it Femtech space, that we as an investor look at that not as a whole space, but rather pick certain stages in the life of a woman and kind of try to formulate hypotheses around that stages. So when you talk about health tech, then you always have the feeling that you need to cure someone's health because there is a disease that you need to get rid of. But if I talk about the marketplace for midwives, I don't consider pregnancy to be a disease. So rather a stage in life. And I think we need to make the shift as investors, and that happens right now, I think, in whole Europe, that we talk about lifestyle or life changing of lifestyles, changing of phases, and that starts with contraception probably. That there's a phase where you talk about children, either because you get them and you need help with, or you can't get them and then you might need help with fertility solutions. And in a certain stage, you're gonna have solutions around menopause. But we need to consider Femtech as a vertical that has so many different stages and sub-verticals that I think there's a lot of theses from other funds, small or big, that would go deep in a certain area. Does it make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to shift gears and talk about products, but before I do, Anjel, I think, did you want to add something to that point before we moved on to Lucas? No, that's fine. Okay, that's cool.
I probably just had one more thought before we move on, if that's okay, Karina. So I don't think it's a niche at all. I also don't think it's any coincidence that we're seeing more female investors in the VC universe doing investment alongside the emergence of more femtech companies. You know, females account for 51% of the population. I also think another transition that we have to go through as a society is femtech is not just a category that impacts women. We all have, you know, a daughter, a sibling, a parent, you know, a family member that's going through a female change or a female health experience that technology has the ability to improve or influence. So one transition I'd love to see over the next 5 years is that we stop defining it as femtech. It's women's health, and everyone in society is impacted by that in some shape or form. So I definitely don't think it's a niche. I think it's a transition that the wider improvement of diversity within venture capital has aided and also assisted making sure that the female entrepreneurs and male entrepreneurs that are specializing in this space are getting the attention and funding that they deserve.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because that is not just about femtech. I hate that term, actually. I think it's quite a pejorative term. And I think it's much wider than that. And my own background is in women's health. I was a doctor in the NHS. My area was women's cancer. And I think that now, you know, investors are waking up to the fact that women are 50% of the world, that they're the primary sources of health care. They're seeking healthcare for their family. And I think that the investors in general are more clued up on female health. In terms of the trends, I think I like the areas of communities. So whether it's bringing pregnant women and midwives, Lucanus and I have a shared portfolio company called Kalea in Germany, where she's built a really good app to bring midwives online and also a companion app to bring pregnant women online. So I like the idea of niche communities because people are seeking communities online, especially with COVID. And also sort of underrepresented groups, so trans women, LGBTQ women, women of lower incomes, Black women, people who are sort of left out from traditional healthcare solutions. I think we need to think about how we're going to tackle them. And I think from a more macro perspective, the idea of diversity in, as Jess was alluding to, not just amongst sort of entrepreneurs, but also, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, to look at your cap table and say, how diverse is it actually? There's a couple of places where I'm an angel investor in lots of female health companies, where I'm often the only female investor. So I think that's something that's also important to think about.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you very much. So just to kind of conclude the European investment landscape conversation, I'm hearing, and I echo that 100%, femtech, women's health, not a niche. I think we're also past the point of investors thinking that that's a niche, whether that's male and or female investors. There's tons of interest in the space. A lot of funds are focusing on it. There are even some funds that are rising up to that specific occasion, so to speak. And yeah, it's really exciting to see where European investment in women's health is going. But Fiona actually brought up a very interesting topic, which is community. And I wanted to talk about that in context of product propositions that you're seeing. So product is actually my favorite topic. I have product strategy background, so I'm super keen to discuss this because at the accelerator at Femtech Lab, we noticed that a lot of femtech entrepreneurs are building products that have a community element, educational or content element, and expert advice element. It's a bit of a pattern or a trend that we've seen, and it's quite interesting because you know, regardless of whether it's, you know, menopause or fertility or menstrual hormonal health, it appears, founders tell us that after product research that they do, what users, women want is community where they can share what they're going through, and some kind of aggregation of resources and information on that topic. From venture scale potential and kind of deep tech product proposition angle, from investors, we often hear that that's not enough as a value add to users, and they want to see more deep tech, or they want to see more behavioral change from that product and more of a health impact from that product. What do you think about that? Do you look at that at all? And what are you looking for in product propositions when you evaluate companies?
If you don't mind, I'll take this one first. For me, the first question that every single time I look at a company product is about whether they have sustainable, scalable competitive advantages, because there is a lot of interest in women's health. There is a lot of different products coming on. And unless you have a very specific competitive advantage that is, you can maintain it for foreseeable future and you can scale it, I think you will lose in the race. So for the evaluation part for me is about some form of a proof or beta testing data points that can show an answer to this, and that can show this is a painkiller, not a vitamin as a product. There is a market for it and people are willing to pay for it. So for me, I'm looking for kind of data, the evidence. And, you know, I understand that a lot of these products are aimed at communities, and women do want communities, but how the key question becomes how well the founder has thought about the revenue model and showing that how the company intends to make money from that. Because at the end of the day, investors, be it angel investors or venture investors, we want return on our investment, and we need to see that we'll get some form of return on it.
May I jump in here? Because I think that's quite interesting. I think that really depends on the stage where you invest. So we are a pre-seed investor, and often the products are not there yet. And so we look at founder market fits, and we did a recent investment with Octopus together in Lavender, an LGBTQ service. And I guess both Octopus and us, we don't know yet what the detailed service offering will look like in future. What we know is that this community has a problem, gets not the same level of care as other communities, and therefore we need to understand whether that problem is big enough, and then trust in the founder that they will iterate a solution alongside the market needs.
That's an interesting point, because I invest a little bit later than Lucanus, usually at seed and Series A via my fund. But a lot of the products that I like I'm picking up very early. So actually I angel invested in the company, in Lavender, in the company that Lucanus and Jess have led the investment, because I just thought, you know, it's too early, but I love the idea of the community and the niche, etc. So that's an LGBTQ plus platform for, it's starting with sexual health services because they're an underserved community. I worked in HIV medicine about 15, 20 years ago, where actually there were a lot of, the LGBTQ community have very specific needs, which were not being met by traditional NHS doctors in the UK, for example. And then I think the idea of what I look for in product as a consumer is actually quite slightly different to what I look as an investor. So as a consumer, I like innovative products that are aesthetically pleasing. So for that, I'm quite keen on the CBD market. So companies like Day or Foria, which are building CBD products for female health, or Trip in the UK, those are things that I think are very sort of beautiful products that I want to use. Whether that's what I would invest in is a slightly different issue.
I guess just to add to some of those themes, so given my background, I love data, and most of my experience has been with Series A plus companies, so slightly later than the panel members. And often at that stage, we hope to see some form of clinical data, obviously depending on what the business does and what the product group is it's servicing and customers it's trying to sell to. But ideally some clinical validation that either their diagnostic test is more accurate than what's out there in the market already, or their therapeutic is more effective than what they're going to be competing against. Not usually possible at pre-seed or seed, but something we'll look to from Series A onwards.
Also controversial point. Oh, sorry.
No, that's totally fine, Fiona. Go ahead. I just wanted to add something, but go ahead first.
My controversial point was going to be, I don't think as an investor we need yet another fertility tracking app.
You're right. we need fertility solutions, not tracking. You're right. I wanted to add something to the product question, because sometimes we are looking, investors are silly, right? We are looking at the solution and think who could use that solution, and then we multiply basket size and stuff like that. But I think in health, you need to go deeper. You need to also look at the side effects of certain products and whether these side effects could actually have a financial impact on the total company as a kind of an overview view. And I give you one example because, Karina, I know you always want examples. There is a company called BrightCure in the UK that helps with urinary tract infections. And obviously, if you can help women getting rid of these infections or not even get them infections in the first place, this is a solution for a certain problem. But you need to dig much deeper. The standard solution for that infection is antibiotics. And it's one of the most prescribed antibiotics in the country, meaning that all these problems with standardized use antibiotics and kind of the development, and then it's not kind of working anymore as a medicine, affects many more people, actually all of us, rather than those affected by the infection. So I think if we consider an investment, we not only look at the product itself, but also at the side effects that the product will bring to us as a community, and then try to calculate.
Very interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that before. That's actually an interesting way to kind of think beyond today in a way. The topic of data came up, and since we have Jess that you mentioned that's a particular interest or a passion area for you, let's maybe talk about that a little bit more. We get a lot of, again, we're looking at super early stage companies, and we get a lot of founders that are building a product, and then they say, we're also going to be collecting data around this particular women's health issue. And then when we have that data, there's going to be potential to do something with it in the future. Considering, especially, those of you that are investing a bit later stage that see that vision play out, do you have any advice for starting out founders, how to think about data in a scalable way? What are the opportunities, and what are some of the challenges that maybe founders should consider, and maybe sometimes are a bit naive at early stages? For example, the fact that users will always super accurately input all of their data into the app.
I mean, my main point, so I was reflecting on data more from a clinical efficacy perspective, but data collection to validate the product and product market fit can start far beyond you have enough money to do a clinical study. And it should, my main takeaway would be that collection of data can't happen too early. So I guess one of the reasons why it's an area that I'm super interested in is the role that I did prior to my current one, was investing in health tech strategically for a large insurer. So we looked at what would it take for this product to be, reimbursed either as an employer or as a term insurance provider. And time again, we found ourselves going back to the data point. So it can be very structured data in the form of a clinical study, or it can be much earlier stage than that. So collecting customer love, customer feedback, and showing the ability to transform that feedback and data into actionable product insights.
And I just want to add to that, when kind of, because we started this conversation around how do we evaluate product, and my kind of point was about data points of maybe beta testing or anything around like user experience, etc., because all of that can happen very, very early stage. And one of a company that I invested in as an angel, and actually Octopus ended up leading the round, is called Tune, and they had such good amount of data points around proving that, one, this tool works, and number two, people love using it.
Just on the point of data, we do a lot of deep tech investments, and funnily enough, there's not many female health or women founders in that space. So, but that aside, I think one of the important things to think when you're building an algorithm or sort of collecting the data set to feed into an algorithm is to think about the source material, because of course we're talking in the context of female health, but there's a lot of sort of solutions out there that are being built for men and women. So we invest a lot in the radiology deep tech space, so using artificial intelligence to diagnose brain tumors or chest infections. But actually they're using a lot of white male data. So it's really thinking about the data that's going in here. Are there Black people? Are there females, etc.? And actually there was a paper that recently came out from Stanford University, which said that actually the AI can tell if this is a Black person or a woman. And that's interesting from the solution point of view, but we need to think about what's going in to make sure that the algorithms are really sort of serving the community that we want them to be serving.
That's very interesting. And I guess when you're an early stage company and you're starting to collect that data, making sure that you're not making kind of the same assumptions around it or mistakes that you're trying to resolve in the first place, and making it as diverse as possible. I kind of wanted to follow up on what Anjel said around when you're evaluating a company and you're sort of seeing certain data points that validate for you that that product is sticking and that there's user traction. Are there any specific KPIs you could mention? For example, we notice, and women as a sector in general, one of our investors actually has said that women are, there's a higher virality effect in Femtech, because when women find a product that they love, they're going to tell everyone about it. And that kind of is sort of the self-promoting marketing, so to speak. But are there any specific KPIs that you look at when you evaluate products at early stage?
Maybe I jump in here just quickly. Also, I think Fiona said she doesn't like the term Femtech. I'm also having my trouble with it. And we sometimes call it taboo tech. So the social stigmas on topics that people don't like to talk about. And for us, one of the KPIs are, if we talk about an issue or a problem, how much is that searched for online? Because people, women, the society don't like to talk to each other about that in the offline world. And the more it is actually searched for, we gather the hypothesis that this is real and this is huge, but it's just not as present as other things, and therefore we have a close look how much information needs are out there.
For me, because again, kind of maybe the stages that I've invested in, it's about how many kind of people have been in the beta testing, what has been the kind of feedback from them, what has been the retention rate, what has the founder done to kind of take all of that on board or not on board, and how has that influenced her decision-making process and strategy planning, that kind of areas of kind of data. And beyond that, when they're kind of a bit later on, is about, okay, then the financial numbers. For me, that's the kind of KPIs I look for, like, okay, what is your cash, what is your potential margins, are you going to make enough margins on this product, etc., etc.
Got it. Thank you for that. Again, let's shift gears a little bit from product more to business models. And again, if we focus a little bit more on the UK and Europe, what do you see are opportunities for Femtech companies when it comes to forming kind of a scalable and exciting business model? I think, Jess, you mentioned very early on about working with insurers or employers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? And then what are the trends or opportunities are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, we're right at the start of the innovation evolution when we think about Femtech. So I think all is up for grabs when we think about what the realm of possibility is for business models. I think what the likes of Day have been able to achieve within B2C is fantastic. But I'm super excited by the opportunity that remains within B2C for business models that can, I guess, evidence an opportunity or a loss for large insurers or employers. So companies like Pepe, who are selling their product access to their platform as a product to large employers, to help keep women in work when they're going through key changes in their female health cycle. So they've got a product and a solution around menopause, and clearly with the impetus around making sure that women feel empowered and safe and healthy in their roles all throughout their career, and particularly at a senior age where, you know, they may be participating in board roles, and we all know how important it is to have diversity at all levels of the hierarchy, but particularly in senior levels, given the targets that we're all working towards. So I really like that, because there's a clear economic need to have more females in senior roles. And I like the fact that they're combining that need and opportunity gap with a healthcare solution. So I'm really excited by that as an opportunity set.
I'd echo that actually, because I quite like that B2B market with insurers. And if we look to the US, actually, you know, we are a little bit behind on that journey in the UK and Europe. So Roe acquired Modern Fertility, which is doing benefits for women's fertility to insurers. Progeny Fertility IPO'd using a very similar sort of model. And of course, Maven, starting off in the fertility benefit area and has moved more laterally, has just become a unicorn. So I think that space, the B2B space, is really exciting and interesting. And from our own portfolio background, Kalea, the German company that's bringing on midwives and pregnant women online, are working with multiple health insurers in Germany, because clearly that is something that works. But of course, Europe is much more fragmented in some ways. So we have to sort of do it country by country.
I just would have to agree with both Fiona and Jessica that B2B from an investor perspective is more interesting, because at the end of the day, as an investor, you don't feel like your money has been spent on consumer marketing, let's say, hugely. And as an investor personally, I feel that there's more return on investment than spending money on marketing. And that's just personal preferences. Others may not agree. So I would prefer, even if the company's early stage, if they have like some MOUs signed with some corporates to say they're going to sign up X amount of people for this product. But I have to also say, if the company doesn't have the kind of in-house within their team people who understand the lengthy process of selling into a corporate and that very long kind of sales cycle, then you don't try to push to go that way, because you really need to have that expertise and that in kind of within your team and leverage that. So it's difficult for us to say, you know, a startup should go this way or that way. It really depends on their product and really depends on their team. But as an investor, I personally prefer B2B.
May I jump in here, because that's actually a very tricky question. Overall, investors look for big markets because their fund models work like that, right? On the other hand, investors traditionally also look, or at least venture capitalists, looked at speed. Healthcare was traditionally assumed as too slow, too regulated, and fintech is much easier to tackle and stuff like that. And so probably it's not one or the other, but it's probably both. You need a certain amount of revenue that you could achieve and the time to get there. And so I actually advise the founders in my stage, in the pre-seed stage, not to go down the B2B route too early, because they tend to become services rather than products because of their huge partners in the market. And then they end up, you know, delivering something for the NHS or for some insurance groups because of the deep pockets they have and because of the deep tickets they pay. And I encourage them to build the B2C product first to get the market feedback directly from the consumer. And if the consumer has a problem that is so big enough, so severe, that they actually pay in addition to not getting that prescribed, but pay out of pocket, then they must do something right. And then in the long term, you can go through all these regulations and negotiations and build up partnerships in parallel. And then you might end up as a B2B business, but you should start as B2C as much as possible in your area. That's my view. And then that the trickiest thing about that is that you have two models right at the beginning, which takes more, it's more difficult. So, so building something in healthcare building something in Femtech is just more difficult than in other verticals.
I think that's a really good point. And maybe one point to add on B2B, particularly when you think about selling as an employee benefit, is actually historically activation of employee benefits has been really disappointing. So I usually see anywhere between 2 to 8% as being good. And the marketing responsibility often sits with you as a vendor rather than the large employer that you're selling to. So I love it when I speak to companies that have really thought about who'll own that customer success journey, rather than just assuming or relying that the employer will do that for you, making sure that you're at the forefront of that individual's mind as and when they need that product or service.
I really love this discussion because the B2C versus B2B2C is just such a discussed topic or challenge for a lot of founders we talk to, and everything you've said I think is so on point. You know, I come from B2B space actually, and so super familiar with the long sales cycle. So I'm a little jaded as soon as someone says it's a B2B proposition, because that nothing is easy at the end of the day, and it's navigating that B2C and B2B is a little bit an art and a science, and ultimately, you know, B2C is marketing, B2B is sales, which are different functions in the business. So if you're trying to do both, kind of, it can actually backfire. And yeah, it's so much, it depends on the founder. What are you going to be better at building within your company? So I think everything you've said has been incredibly on point. And we actually have one of our later stage companies, Lactap, has done that really well. Just kind of to shed a light on an example, it's a breastfeeding consultation app, and they've really nailed a quarter of all Spanish mothers use the solution. But then once they've got that down, they sort of moved into building partnerships with companies like LV, and that works out really well for them because now they're kind of managing both at the same time after proving the B2C. So yeah, I think founders need to really think about, for them, what's authentically the best route to achieve that. Amazing. We have a few questions that I wanted to address. I think there's one startup, it feels like, that's asking an interesting question about kind of modeling the costs or benefits of a product that they're building in context of maybe NHS or insurance. And the product has kind of long-term treatments that would save costs for the patients or for the healthcare system on the more costly treatments later on. Maybe Fiona, could you shed some light on that, and how should founders think about, especially when they're pitching to NHS or insurance, how should they think about pitching a product that's kind of, I guess, preventative for future costs?
I can certainly speak about the NHS, which is where I have a lot of my expertise from. So I think it is very long sales cycles there. You know, it takes years for things to sort of get into play and to become something that is, you know, this gold standard for X, Y, and Z. It takes a long time. And that's something that founders need to, I guess, recognize. However, if you can sell into the NHS, it brings huge credibility to you as a startup. And it is seen as one of the gold standard health systems in the world. So there is that real benefit. So it's a sort of risk benefit thing in terms of how hard you try to do that. In terms of, I guess, what people want to see in the NHS, most people, want to see data, and that sounds a little bit glib, but it's really important. They want to see clinical trials. They want to see how users have, what the sort of user adoption rates are, what's the real evidence on the ground? Does it actually work? I think that's important. Is it better than what's available at the moment? Do you have those comparison? Do you have that comparison data as well? And then also, I think the importance of getting key opinion leaders on board early. So if you have something, that's in the breastfeeding space, have you got breastfeeding experts? Have you got midwives, etc., to come on to sort of champion your product? I think that's also important, because the people who work in the NHS are a specific type of person who would recognize somebody like them on the other side of the table. So I think if you can say we've got X, Y, and Z person involved as a clinical champion, that also adds a lot of credibility.
Maybe just one point to add to that. I agree with all that Fiona set out. Depending on what the product or service is that he or she is building, NICE guidelines do a great job of setting out what health economic analysis should look like, depending on what the vertical is. So it's worth looking those up.
Oh, and just one point, I think sometimes health health economic analysis can add something, but obviously it's at a very early stage. It's you kind of wasting money in some ways, but it's something to think about on the roadmap for later on, that actually you've brought a health economist on board and you've done some work to actually find out, because it's easy to say we're going to save you X million pounds, but sometimes it's a bit basic. You can't just extrapolate from one test to a million or a billion. It doesn't work as easily as that. So I think getting a health economist to do a little bit of consulting work might also be beneficial.
May I add a bit of different view here? I don't know about the startup, but the cost discussion is always there. And if the discussion is about how much money a hospital could save or the system could save, there is always two people and three views on that. The question is whether hospitals are there to save money, and I don't think so. Hospitals are there to provide services on the highest quality available with the budget that they have. And so often I advise startups to shift the discussions away from saving costs, but towards increasing the availability of the resources to do better jobs. I give you an example to make it more feasible. There's a company called ThinkSono in Berlin and UK. They help nurses to do deep vein thrombosis the diagnosis, rather than only having experts, radiologists doing that. You could say you save costs because the radiologist costs more than the nurse, and so the hospital has more profit by not using the expensive workforce, but rather the less expensive workforce. But actually what they should argue on, what they do now, is that they free the experts, the radiologists, to do more high quality work, and therefore increase the quality of the outcome of patients rather than reduce.
That's a very, very good point. I think we need to wrap up soon, but there's one, I think, good question that we can end with. If you had a magic wand, what would be the ideal women's health product or solution to invest in right now?
I would definitely want something that tackles this aging population of women. So, and back to Fiona's controversial point, no more cycle tracking, please.
So I agree with you, Anjel. I love the research and gap there is looking at long-term chronic illnesses such as dementia and Alzheimer's, and what that means linking to female health across the life cycle. So there's some really interesting studies been done that set out and hypothesize that the menopause process and how healthy and successful that is largely linked to those types of illnesses in later life. I see a very few number of tech companies in that space, and it's one that I'm really interested in.
Maybe again controversial here. We invested in fertility treatments and contraception platforms, pregnancy services, and I think what we haven't invested yet, and what I'm really looking forward to invest in, is services that help women in special emergency situations where they just need help and they don't get it. And that could be a cancer diagnosis. It could be like really stages in their life that impact not only them, but the whole family and the whole community around them. And if someone out there, built something there, they should reach out.
And I think that there would be an interesting space for somebody to build something around health navigation. So actually fertility, there's so many fertility companies, but if you're a gay couple trying to use the surrogate to have a baby, it's actually quite difficult to find that information, and it's not all in one place. So I think that would be quite an interesting space to build as well.
Amazing. Thank you all very, very much. I've learned a lot. Hope the audience did as well. And Becky, we're ready to hand the stage back over to you. Thanks for having us.
Thank Thank you so much, everyone. That was really interesting as well. I mean, I learned a huge amount. I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm certainly not the expert, but a massive thanks to all of you. And thank you for the segue to our next panel, which is sort of building Femtech as a distinctive market, but more importantly, what is the value in the name Femtech? So by the sounds of it, it's quite a controversial topic already. So I hope everyone will be able to join us later on. But thank you once again to what has been a fantastic panel to kick off Femtech Leaders. Hugely appreciated. And I will see you all back here very shortly for our next session. Thanks so much.